Dixon, and I go to Fremont Middle School. I currently go to Fremont Middle School, and I'm 11 years old, and I'm in the 6th grade. The topic of my speech is going to be about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin was born to Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Sr. and Alberta Williams King. His legal name at birth was Michael, but his own father changed his own name from Michael to Martin Luther. Later said that the name Michael was recorded incorrectly. Martin Jr. was the middle child between his older sister, Willie Christine King, and Martin also had younger brothers named Alfred Daniel Williams King, but a lot of them just called him Al for short. Martin loved to sing. Martin loved to sing so much that he accompanied his church choir in the Atlanta premiere of the movie Gone with the Wind in 1939. Martin began first grade with his sister. Martin was expelled in January of 1934 after he spilled the beans by saying to his first grade teacher that he's only 5 years old. In late January, Martin entered first grade again at Young Street Elementary School. Martin entered second grade at the same school in late September of the year 1935. Martin transferred over to David T. Elementary School for third grade in 1936. Martin had best friends when he was growing up, and they were white. It didn't matter to Martin what kind of friends he had, just as long as he had friends to play with. But their mothers didn't like Martin because they were during the time of segregation, and that meant that the whites thought the blacks were all high and mighty, but they weren't. But that's how it was back when all the segregation was happening. The whites were just like any other ordinary people, just like African Americans and other different races. Martin went to 10th grade at the same school, which was David T. High School instead of elementary. In 1944, Martin delivered his speech called The Negro and the Constitution in Dublin, Georgia. Martin quit his job at the Railroad Expressway because a supervisor called him racial slurs in 1946. Martin became chair of the local NAACP Youth Council Membership Committee in the year 1947. In 1948, Martin began his very first year at Crowther Theological Seminary. After being at Crowther for 3 years, in 1951, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. graduated with a Bachelor of Divinity degree. In 1954, Martin began being a pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Martin earned a couple of degrees over his lifetime. One of his degrees was his PhD in systematic theology at Boston University. In 1963, Martin was involved in the Birmingham campaign. Martin delivered his I Have a Dream speech to thousands and thousands of people from all over the country to hear his speech. And it had a very powerful message and was also very strong for the African American people and other races in 1963. Also in 1963, Martin won the Nobel Peace Prize for everything he did and all the work he did for the blacks. Another thing Martin did is he gave his Beyond Vietnam speech to a lot of people at New York City's Riverside Church. King, representing the Southern Christian Leadership Committee, was among leaders of the so-called Big Six civil rights organizations of the March on Washington and for Jobs and Freedom, which took place on August 28, 1963. Another leader in organization comprising the Big Six was Roy Wilkins from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In 1968, Martin was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he decided to step outside. And when he stepped outside, someone shot him. Lots of people at the hotel heard the gunfire go off, and when the police came, everyone pointed at the balcony where Martin was shot. More than in 100 cities, blacks were throwing a riot. 4 days after Dr. King's murder, Michigan Representative John Conyers Jr. presents legislation for a federal holiday in Martin's honor. After 7 days of Martin's murder, President Johnson signed the Fair House Act. Martin's wife, Coretta, found the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. Today, in Washington, D.C., there is a monument of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with some of his famous quotes. Rest in peace, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and to you audience, thank you for listening to my speech.